Hello everyone and welcome to the Science of Sport podcast. This is the Tokyo 2025 special series. World Championship kicks off on Saturday the 13th from Tokyo, and as we've done for the last few years, our intention is to give you daily coverage, as well as close to daily as we possibly can. We have a few obligations and commitments, all three of us, and so we'll do what we can to get you daily wraps and previews of what's to come. This is the preview show, and for it I'm joined by my usual co-host Mike Finch and our most regular guest on this show. I reckon this is... Are you in double figures? Sean, you must be in double figures by now.
I wouldn't know, but I always enjoy coming on, and I always learn something as well.
Well, thanks so much for your time. So the intention today is to just chat a little bit about what we look forward to in Tokyo, some of the on-track highlights, some of the off-track stories, and Sean is the perfect man to do that with us. Mike, let's take it away. What are you expecting out of Tokyo? In fact, last year you were in Budapest. Not last year, the last World Championships that were held were 2 years back, and you were in Budapest. Any regrets and FOMO?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd love to be there this year, but obviously circumstances haven't allowed it this year. But it's such a grand event in terms of track and field, and I think anything that involves a championship style racing, like the Olympics or the World Championships, always makes me more excited about it because I don't particularly like the sort of diamond leagues and the pace setters and all that sort of thing. I feel like championship racing is the true measure of an athlete. And when you see a world champion and you see an Olympic champion, I think you see the real athletes, and I think that's why it's quite inspiring. So I think that's where the championships kind of sit for me. And I think what's interesting this year, and maybe Sean can comment on this, but that for the first time since I can remember, the championships are the end of the track and field season as opposed to kind of second from the end. Normally the Zurich Weltklasse is the one that finishes off the season. Why have they changed it this year to the last event of the track and field season, Sean?
Well, that's down to the World Athletics president, Sebastian Coe. He believes the sort of season should end on a bang with the most important event. Um, but it means that we're now into September. Some athletes have been on the go since April, so we don't know whether some might be too tired, some might be overcooked. So it makes it quite an interesting champs, and I'm sure on one level it'll be absolutely brilliant. Noah Lyles will be there going for those 3 gold medals. We'll have the debut of Gout, the astonishing Australian who could be the new Bolt. We have many of the stars that are up: Paris, Duplantis, Sydney McLaughlin, Leverone, Keely Hodgkinson, Femke Bol. But there's also quite a lot of uncertainty because it's so late. I do wonder whether, I mean, us athletics hardos will all be watching, but I do wonder with the European soccer season, with other things, whether it will get quite the eyeballs that it normally would. And I think the failure of Michael Johnson's Grand Slam track perhaps puts a bit more pressure on the sport and the event to deliver in Tokyo.
Ross, your thoughts on this end of the season? I mean, it's a good point because it's a long season for the track and field athletes, and you kind of think that they've got to, some of them have got to peak twice, but some of them might just peak for individual events. Some of them might peak for events that make sure they get a lot of money. Other ones might say, well, World Championships, there's not the same financial incentives as there are at the big Diamond League events.
Yeah, the rest of the world is learning how South Africa and Southern Hemisphere countries struggle to peak at a World Champs. Because this used to be our dilemma all the time. Because in South Africa, the track season would have been December, January, February, and then the SA Champs were normally in March. And then you'd ask those athletes to go to late July, August to run a World Championships. And oftentimes South Africans would perform quite well early and then be completely cooked up and washed by the time the Worlds came on. So it's quite a dilemma. And I mean, I actually think like they're going to have to rethink the Diamond League because the first Diamond League meets are those Chinese ones, which are in May, early May, right?
Yep.
Like the best athletes will have to sacrifice those because you can't be in Diamond League race shape in May, June, then try and do your national champs July, peak Diamond League August, and then run Worlds in September. It's too long a peak. So something has to give. And like I think we saw Zurich's big Diamond League finale, what was it, a week and a half, 2 weeks ago? It was actually quite a diluted affair because so many of the athletes said, this is actually, I'm going to go and train now because it's a week and a half, 2 weeks to go. So the peak of the Diamond League season and the start of the Diamond League season seemed to me to be compromised by this.
I agree, and it's interesting. I was chatting to George Mills, the British 5,000 meter runner, and he competed in the Diamond League final. But he said to me, I actually had a hard training session on the Monday before the event on, I think it was on the Wednesday. He said, so I knew I was gonna basically blow up with 150 meters to go, and that's what happened. But wait till I get to Tokyo, I'll be ready. I think some other athletes may have run their best races in August rather than September, so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Jess Hull was in the same boat. Remember, she ran an amazing 1400 meters in Zurich. Unfortunately, it was a 1500 meter race, and then afterwards said also that she was looking forward to just finishing off the training block 2 weeks, and in Tokyo things would be different. So I think a lot of athletes are in that situation. And then others just didn't even bother going because they know where they are in their training and they'd rather not race it. So
I mean, I'm always intrigued by what drives and incentivizes athletes, because a lot of them obviously driven by the financial reward, and we know that track and field is not what it was. It's not what like any other sports like golf and American football, not even in that same category. But is it more valuable for a track and field athlete? I mean, I'm looking at the prize money now for individuals. So to win an event at the World Championships is worth $70,000 US. If you're a team member, it's 80,000 for the team, etc., etc. World records are given 100,000. How does that compare to, for instance, being incentivized at a Diamond League to run a world best or a world record, or to just win those events? Because I'd imagine there's more money in Diamond League for the athletes, the very ones at the top of the scale, than there would be at a World Championships. Sure. Yeah.
Certainly, there's appearance money,
Yeah.
and some of the best athletes will get that. I think from memory, the Diamond League final, they split it up into sort of the Diamond League winner, which I think I want to say was $30,000, and then there were some events that were sort of Diamond League plus, and they would double that. I think a lot also depends on what's actually written into their contract. So, for example, I know someone like Josh Kerr, for instance, the 1500-meter Brit, he will have bonuses tied more to his performance at major championships than, say, and his sponsors know that he will actually race less. Other athletes may have a different bonus structure. So I think the answer is it does depend.
And so do you think the World Championships has the gravitas that it deserves? In other words, those top athletes, is the World Championships the biggest event for their year this year?
No, yeah, no, for most, absolutely. And I do think it will be fantastic. I fly out tomorrow. I'm looking really forward to being there. I guess my sense when I watch this, I have my journalist hat on, and also my almost that sort of fan hat on. The fan in me thinks it will be great. The journalist in me, though, wonders whether the sport has got it right in terms of when it's positioned, and also what it is doing to attract those casual fans, and is it doing enough?
Yeah. Ross, one of the things we always discuss on this podcast at major events is always the weather. And I kind of think every time we talk about the Olympics or the World Championships, the weather seems to be an issue, from Doha to Paris I remember being in Budapest, and the heat was, hard to explain how hot it was every single day. And we spent a lot of my time in the media center just because it was cooler there. But it doesn't seem to be as big an issue in Japan as it has been on many different events, which I guess should lead to arguably better performances.
yeah, but that's the only silver lining of moving it to the mid-September, right?
Yeah.
And it won't be again, because if they do keep it there, then whether it goes to London, anywhere in the northern hemisphere, even if they take the next one's in Beijing, right? I saw someone say the other day Kenya's pushing pretty hard to host it. I don't know what sort of look that gives, given all the doping things there. Do you know, was that true, or was there someone just making suggestion of that?
No. I am told they're looking to award the next two, and you have Britain, you have Germany, and you have Kenya are three of the ones bidding for the next two events. London are only interested in 2029. I'm not sure about the other two and whether they would take 2031. But yeah, that's being discussed this week in Tokyo.
Anyway, I digressed in my answer. The short answer is that moving it later almost sidesteps the heat issue. So that if they ever do, and I'm pretty sure this will go Middle East more regularly, seems to be the trend, and Asia, then that deals with that problem. So Co might say there's two upsides to moving it to the end. It's the peak and the crescendo, but it also sidesteps the weather. So I don't think Tokyo will throw any of the stories we saw in Budapest and Doha at us.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure for you, you remember that heat in Budapest. I mean, it was just remarkable how hot it was, and it was like a sort of like a blanket over you when you were walking around the stadium, even. So being in the stands, I can't remember in Budapest. They didn't have. I don't remember them having fans and stuff at the bottom and air conditioners blowing out like they did in Doha. It was just basically held in the evening, most of the big events to avoid the heat, wasn't it? I can't remember if there's anything special that they did.
No, what was interesting as well about Budapest, it was a sort of it was a stadium, and part of it was temporary. But I remember
Mm.
chatting to some of the athletes, there was almost no wind in the stadium at all, and it had quite a strange effect. And I know, like Sharika Jackson and the Puma guys were convinced she would have broken the world record if there had been just a tiny amount of wind. But instead, there was almost sort of dead air inside the stadium, which made it even more stuffy. But yeah, you're right. It won't be as hot in Japan, but it will be an incredibly fast track. And even though some athletes may well be tired and maybe overcooked, I do think we'll see some very fast times.
One of the things that I think stands out for me was the crowd support in Budapest. I mean, it was every single day. And I think even in the morning sessions, it was almost fully packed every single day. Very vocal crowd, very passionate. Are we expecting similar support in Tokyo, Sean?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, when I spoke to Seb Coe about this about a week or so ago, and I'm just reading what he said. He said, Tokyo preparation is going well. I can report ticket sales are pretty good. We've got 50,000 people most nights, and a few nights absolutely sold out. And
Wow.
that's always been my mantra. I've always hammered home to local organisers, any local government, when they have the opportunity, we have to have full stadia. It's a big stadia, it's 70,000. Blah, 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 blah. So yeah, so it's going to be good crowds. And we don't have many morning sessions at all. We have them at the weekends, and I think the first, well, the only Monday as well with them. I think one of the marathons, but otherwise it's mostly evenings.
Well,
Most
remember,
evenings, yeah.
Tokyo was denied its opportunity to watch its own party in 2021, 2020, well, the Olympics.
Yeah.
So the people will either be over it completely or they'll turn out in vast numbers because, it was a real shame for them. None of them got to see the action in their previous big event, so they'll come out this time, I'm sure. And it is a country with like pretty great athletic history and heritage, particularly in the marathon, interestingly, and some good sprinters, which we may get onto in a moment. So I do expect that they'll have very good numbers.
Well, let's kick off with some of the highlights. So maybe we should start off with the short distances. Ross, what stands out for you in the sprints? Maybe we can kick off with the sprint rivalries, of which there are a few and many.
Yeah, and I mean, I may as well chuck a prediction in. Jamaica will reclaim the sprint crowns from the US.
Okay.
Not on the women's side, on the men's side. On the women's side, it's US. But the men, Keishan Thompson and Seville, Oblique Seville, will be, because remember that they were the fastest in the world going into the Paris Olympics, and Lyles beat them on the day. I don't see that happening this time. I'm sure Lyles will medal, but I think they'll win that 100-meter title. And then the
Because Lars
200.
has had a few injury issues this year, and we didn't perform particularly well in the US trials, not compared to what we expect of him. But he certainly put out a game. We know that there's a big rivalry between him and Kenny Bednarek, and there was at the trials. But do you reckon that there's going to be sort of a third place for Lars, or do you think he's going to be mixing it for the win?
I don't know. The Seville ran a 9.87 in pouring rain. I think it would have been in Lausanne, and the next best guy ran outside 10. He looked so good. Keishan Thompson won the Jamaican trials, but hasn't looked as good since. He pulled out of the Diamond League final two meetings with some shin splint injury, so that would be a slight concern. Lyles' trajectory is good. And in fact, you're right, he delayed the start of his season. And in the context of what we were talking about before, that might have helped him extend the peak to later in the year. So he seems like he's on the upward trajectory. But when you look at the way that he's been beaten in the races he has lost this year, he doesn't seem to have the top end. So I suspect that he'll be fighting for a minor medal. But you never know. He's shown twice now that he peaks when he has to. So
Plus, we can't forget the swag. I mean, Sean, your thoughts on the men's sprints? I'll give you some of mine, but I'm not sure I'd entirely agree with Ross on this one, to be honest.
Um, I think do you go with the proven performer that can always somehow dig it out in especially in the 100, or do you go with, I think, Shane and Oblique, who have been better this year? I think for me, the other interesting thing, and I was chatting to a top sprint coach about this, is what happens in the men's 200. And this sprint coach made the point to me that because Lars hasn't been able to put in the work that he'd like over, over the last few months because of injuries, maybe when we get to the 200 and it's his sixth race in that final, he may not be as fresh as we expect, and you may see Letsley Tobogo beat him in that race. The bookmakers have Shane Thompson as 10 to 11, so slightly odds on, slightly better than 50% chance to win the 100. They have Lars as big favourite to win the 200. Both races are very interesting and may not go quite as we expect.
So, I mean, one thing person we haven't mentioned is Gout, the Australian, the 17-year-old, competing his first sort of senior world championships. Neither of you suggesting that he's going to be a contender.
No way. He might not even be the fastest teenager. I mean, he's sensationally good, but is the Japanese guy who broke the under-18 world record running, surely they'll pick him for his own world champs.
I think he is, but that's the 100, isn't it?
Yeah.
Rather than Gout's only doing the 200.
Oh, so he's only in the 2. But I just don't see. He's not.
He ran a slightly wind-assisted 19.8 this year, and I was chatting to his agent James Templeton last week. He's actually was studying his exams last week, and he's not doing any one-on-one interviews, but he'll do some media with Adidas just before he runs. But he's really excited, very confident, and he made James made the point to me that he thinks he can run, under 20, and that will certainly get him into the final. I think the other thing he said is that normally Australia sends 2 or 3 journalists. They're sending 18.
Wow.
To Tokyo, so he's going to be a big story, and it's the start of a journey. It'd be fascinating to see how he does. It'd be great, but I can't. If you're thinking you've got Kenny Bednarek, you've got Lars, you've got Tobogo, you've got people like Zarnell Hughes as well. It's taking a stretch to see Gout getting into the top 3, I think. But I'd love to see him in the final, and it'd be great for the sport.
Yeah, I could see a final.
I'm very surprised you both say that, to be honest, because I would have thought there would have been a really good chance of that. And I do believe that Tebogo Letsele, the Olympic champion in the 200 meters, is going to be odds-on favourite. But I guess we don't know too much about his form.
Well, he lost to Lyles in Zurich, narrowly. But as I say, Tebogo is one of the guys, by the way, I think he's just raced too long. Because he was there right at the start of the Diamond League season as well, and I think you've got 2 divergent trajectories between him and Lyles. But Sean's right. Lyles may find that the 6th race out of 6 is one too far, one too many.
Yeah. All right, and then women's sprints. I mean, the big story is probably the Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce, her final World Championship. She's retiring after this one. I mean, she's one of the biggest names, 3-time Olympic champion, 10 times gold medalist at World Championship level. I mean, she's iconic in many different ways, and she won't win, but hopefully in the final to send her on her way and into an amazing legacy that she's left. Sean.
Yeah, I was thinking. I was actually in Beijing in 2008 when she came almost from nowhere. To win gold, and it's staggering that 17 years on she is still going. Yes, I think she'll get to the final. I can't see. I mean, it's clearly between Melissa Jefferson-Wood and Julian Alfred. I think most people would think Jefferson-Wood is probably going to win. Alfred's coming back from a minor injury. It would be amazing to see Shelly-Ann get a medal. It's not impossible, but I do think it's unlikely, and maybe another Jamaican, Tia Clayton, perhaps is more likely to get a bronze. But yeah, she's had an incredible career, and it would be lovely to see her go out with one final hurrah, whether it's a medal in the individual or perhaps in the relay.
Sean, Sha'Carri Richardson, what's the latest on there? I know she's been in the news a lot because she's been seeing videos of her attacking her boyfriend. But is she participating in the World Champs, or isn't she?
She is, as far as I can see. I'm not close to her camp, so I've got no insights
I
there.
thought there was some
Yeah,
doubt about it, yeah. But anyway, so
she
as far as you know, she is participating.
yeah, she's obviously not had a very good season, and she's had some off field issues or off track issues. But yeah, it would. I mean, she wasn't particularly fancied when she won in Budapest, and people were thought it. Sharika was going to win, and she surprised everyone. Uh, it would be a surprise if she is, in the medals this time.
Yeah, even the
So who's your
final.
100? Who's your 100 meter winner then, Ross? In the women's.
Jefferson Woodard probably, unless she comes
Okay.
off the level she was at, because I think she's been running. We've spoken a lot about athletes who've been racing for so long. She has too. She ran that 10.7 in the Grand Slam track meet, right?
Mm.
And she's still running
Yeah,
10.7s now. So, and I reckon she could probably run 10.6 because she ran a few windy, not wind assisted, wind disadvantaged in the United States, where she ran 10.7s, 10.8s into wind. So I think she's a pretty big favourite for me there.
she had some injuries last year before Paris, and she moved to US coach Dennis Mitchell, who I know is controversial to put it mildly,
Mm.
this year. But yeah, this year she has been absolutely sensational, and I think yeah she's the rightful favourite by far.
Are you anticipating any controversies there if and when she wins it because of the Gabby Thomas posts, which were pretty veiled insinuations about that? And Dennis Mitchell, incidentally, might have the entire women's 4x100 relay team.
Now, Ross, just explain what posts you're talking about.
Well, the context is, first of all, that Dennis Mitchell is a notoriously famous doping athlete, then coach, who's had some pretty shady athletes caught under his coachship as well. And a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so now, Gabby Thomas posted on Instagram saying that she believes that if you coach banned athletes or your athletes fail test as a coach, you should be banned for life as a coach. Didn't name him specifically, but I think many people took it to mean the athletes he was working with at the moment or is working with at the moment. Was that your read of that the same, Sean?
Absolutely, yes. 100%. It was fairly clear. And Mitchell, as you say, does coach a lot of big stars. He also spoke to coaches Kenny Badanarak. He coaches Tanwisha Terry. He coaches Shakiri Richardson. But I think yeah, she was clearly having a pop at him, I think.
Mm.
And
I
of
mean,
course,
we know.
we all know he Dennis Mitchell is the guy of the famous excuse.
Yeah.
He was caught with testosterone, I think 1998, and let me find it. Yeah, he claimed the night before the test he'd drunk 5 beers and had sex with his fiancee 4 times, stating that it was her birthday, the lady deserved a treat, and he got a 2-year ban for that.
Yeah, and then he coached Gatlin was one of his athletes. He's coached a few pretty shady performances and athletes. So Thomas is now out of the world champs, by the way. So they're not
Yeah,
in Tokyo together. But anyway,
she's injured, isn't she? She's got some Achilles tendon problems or something.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's quite sad actually, because she's certainly one of the. I mean, I think for many of people listening to this will have watched the sprint series, and I've been quite intrigued by it. I thought the first season was great. The second season I thought wasn't quite as good, but I think to some extent, and I'm sure Sean, you could probably add some value to this, but do you think that those sort of TV series has really kind of helped raise the profile of the athletes in places like Japan and globally? I mean, I'd be interested to see whether or not global audiences are higher now since that series happened versus potentially before, now that people know the characters involved.
Yes and no. I think it was noticeable in Paris at the Olympics when Lyles's name was announced. There was huge cheers for him, and I think he has definitely sort of broken through into the mainstream. I was on a call last week with Sydney McLaughlin of Rowan, who I know wasn't in the sprint series, but she's obviously a famous athlete in track and field eyes, and she sort of was admitting she doesn't really get spotted still very much. Um, Interestingly, I was chatting to a British 200-meter runner called Toby Harris, who's running in Tokyo, and he made the point to me the biggest track and field race, quote unquote, in the past year was Noah Lyles against a YouTuber,
Yeah.
someone called I Show Speed. His real name is Darren Watkins, who's a 19 or 20-year-old guy now, and they raced over 50 meters for $100,000. And I'd never seen this, but it was last November, and and this YouTuber has 43 million followers on YouTube. Lars beats him, although it's closer than you might think. And this has been watched by 3.5 million people. And Toby made the point to me that this guy had hyped the sport more than the Diamond League had, and had more views than many of the Diamond Leagues. And I thought that was really interesting as a sort of point of where the sport is, and perhaps it does things quite conservatively. And I think athletics thought that the sprint series and being on Netflix would make a big difference, but perhaps it didn't take all the lessons from Drive to Survive. I know Formula One journalists, and they tell me that in the paddock on Thursday, all the drivers they essentially they know they're puppets, but they're filming content, and this content is going on social media. It's helping promote the sport. And I don't want to be rude to Formula One, but for my eyes, it's boring. You know, top two or three drivers are going to win. Not much happens, and yet, indisputably, it's far more popular than track and field. So I think I'm not saying that Netflix hasn't helped. I think it's helped a small amount, but actually, the broader lessons were you have to sell your sport. You have to do more on social media. You have to be thinking of new audiences. How do you attract people in their teenagers and early 20s? And I think track and field has not done that at all. And it's interesting. This one event with Noah Lyles taking on this YouTuber has done more views on YouTube by far than any actual race over the past 12 months.
Ross, I mean, it's fair to say that Michael Johnson's track series hasn't done what everybody expected it to do, but potentially what it's done is kind of helped the World Athletics to look at their formats to say, okay, we need to tackle some of the issues to make the sport more relevant. I mean, we saw in Zurich at the Weltklasse how they had the field events the day before the track events, and then the field events were held in a sort of a smaller compound where people could be right close to them and cheer them on. And we saw, I mean, the high jump that was fantastic there. It seems like something like Michael Johnson's kind of series almost ignites the World Athletics into action about ways of making the sport more attractive to a wider audience.
I'm not sure that Johnson's series is the thing doing that. I think that the existence or the idea of a Grand Slam track was probably a response to the same condition that has driven those things out of Zurich. Because I think it's fair to say that Coe came into the presidency on two tickets. One was women's sport, and the other one was to try and promote the sport and to try and repackage and rebrand and market track and field a little bit better. So I think World Athletics was already looking for solutions to the same problems that Grand Slam track purports to solve. And if anything, Grand Slam track was Johnson's solution, which was to get rid of field and let people look. That was I'm being somewhat facetious, but also to let people race and see stories develop over the course of a weekend and over a series. I think it's the same. Fundamentally, it's the same thing the sport is trying to do when it puts athletes into town squares and lets people see it up close and try and tell stories a little bit better. But Sean's right. We know what needs to be done, right? But they don't quite nail it like a kid with 43 million YouTubers was able to. I'll never understand that, by the way. I just don't get it.
I don't either, but that will attract a new audience.
Yeah.
I mean, I was chatting to Stuart McMillan, the sprint coach who you guys know has been on your pod. And he said to me, it's not a dying sport, but the authorities need to treat it as it is because it's trending in the wrong direction. You know, everyone is making less money. There's less eyeballs on it. There's less sponsors. There's less meets. And he essentially said athletes, agents, federations, meet directors all have a responsibility. And then he said there needs to be some sort of come to Jesus moment about the current state of the sport. And I think that's right. It's not die. It's still popular. It's still incredibly. Paris was great, but it has to be thinking, how do we get the next generation into the sport, the TikTok generation? And I don't necessarily think, proposals like, shall we make the long jump board bigger? That doesn't change anything in my mind, and things like, track and field people, some of it will think some of this is ridiculous, but I would, if you had Keely Hodgson race 800 meters against Premier League footballers, that would get eyeballs on it. If you had, I don't know, some of the best sprinters racing the best 400 meters runners over 250, that would get more. I think you don't do all this all the time, but I think there is scope in the calendar for trying new things and finding ways that have casual people who might not really see the sport a lot, at least getting into the sport. Once they have that, then they can follow people's journeys and perhaps the more traditional outlets the sport.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think that track and field, I know we're digressing slightly from our preview here, we'll get back to it, but one of the most interesting things I think about track and field, and you just have to go to World Championships or watch it on television and understand that if there's anything that you can sell, it's just the beauty of the athletes that we look at. I mean, track and field athletes are really fantastic looking individuals, and I often think that they don't take enough advantage of that because it's something to behold. I mean, they really are, pole vaulters are the strength and speed and the necessity to be able to have both of those things, the courage needed, the acumen. I mean, it's just amazing that they don't focus on that part of the sport, to me, because I think that's really the attraction that they should be promoting a little bit more. But anyway, talking about one of the aspects that we got on earlier, moving on to maybe a slightly longer of the events, I think rivalries are key. And one of the key rivalries, I think, is the one between, hopefully, Femke Bol and Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone.
Well,
I mean, they look set to compete in the 400-meter hurdles. Is that right?
They're not, no. And that's one of the things that's, if anything, it's symptomatic of some of the challenges the sport faces, because McLaughlin-Lerrone's only doing the 400, not the hurdles.
So she's not doing the hurdles.
So you'll see.
Do we know why?
Is she bored? Sean, you spoke to her last week. I mean, what's her motivation? I think she just wants the challenge of seeing how fast she can go at it. Because the 400 hurdles, let's face it, she runs it, she breaks world records, and she disappears.
Yeah, no, she said to me, part of the challenge, part of my excitement is being able to step into an arena that is competitive, and see where I fare against the best. I want to show myself what I can do without the hurdles in front of me. And she sort of hinted that maybe in LA she might do both events. But yeah, she wants to challenge herself. She knows she'd turn up, she'd win the 400 hurdles, but she wants to, and I think she wants to see how close she can get. Can she get under 48 seconds? I mean, Marita Cox's world record of 47.6 has stood, forever, and she was saying that that's a way off. But maybe someone someday will go under that, and Sydney is one of the people that perhaps could do it.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in that one, actually, because NASA beat Paulinho in the Diamond League final. First time she'd beaten her in some time. So Paulinho's the Olympic champion. NASA's not recently come back from her ban, but before her doping ban for, I think it was a whereabouts failure, was the best 400-meter athlete. And obviously Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone now goes against them. So that should be a fairly competitive race for the medals. And you'd think McLaughlin-Levrone will come and run a little faster than the other two are capable of, but she hasn't done it so far. I think a lot of people expected her to, in the couple of races she's done, be a little faster than she has been. But maybe that's just a symptom, again, of the late peak, right, Sean?
I think so. She's talked about, I mean, she obviously did Grand Slam track. She was one of the stars of that. And then she hasn't raced much since. She said that training is going really well. She's feeling great. And she feels that she's going to run. I mean, all athletes say this, of course, but she was not hyping her chances, but insisting that she would run fast. I think it will be one of the races of the champs. And again, I think in terms of pedigree, she's the one. But in terms of times, obviously, you look at the other two, and clearly with NASA's past doping ban, that raises question marks, and it could add an element of, I don't know, the word is spice or controversy, whatever else with the race.
So you're both suggesting that if it was McLaughlin-Levrone versus Femke Bol in the 400-meter hurdles, it would be a fait accompli that McLaughlin-Levrone should win that. So there's therefore no incentive for her to see that as a competition. Because I think in the world of track and field, we all want to see that. In Budapest, Femke Bol was one of the stars of the event because McLaughlin-Levrone wasn't there. So it's quite sad that she's not participating, to be honest with you, as a track and field fan, because that was one of the rivalries I thought was top of mind, I think, in track and field.
Yeah, I mean, there's little other to say than you're right. It's you need head to heads, right? How do you tell stories without those? Because Bol should win that 400 hurdles relatively easy. But maybe, hey, you get a story in the 400 flat now, like Sean says. I agree with him. It'll be one of the races. So maybe you lose on one side, gain on another. to answer your question, if they were both in the same race, McLaughlin's winning.
And in terms of the middle distances, Ross, I'll let you kick this one off. What are the events that you are most looking forward to, and what seems the most exciting in the middle distance events?
The middle distances is going to be the most exciting batch in Tokyo. They're going to be superb. The men's 1500, there's 5 guys who could win that. There's Ingebrigtsen coming back for the first races of his year. How does he do that tactically? The Dutch guy, Laros, who I've already said is winning it, so take that to the bank, Sean. Put money on that one. I can't see how anyone beats Laros. What he's shown in the last 2 Diamond League races seems to me to be unbeatable. But anyway, we'll get to that. Women's 5,000, Chebet against Kipyegon. Going to be the best women's race of the championships, I think. And then step back down, the men's 800. Malcolm Gladwell said the weirdest event in the sport. I think it's going to be tremendous because there's same story there. There's 5 or 6 guys who could win that. Wanyonyi is the favourite because he's the consistently best guy. But I wouldn't put money on that one, that's for sure. I think any one of 5 or 6 guys could win that. So I think the middle distances are going to be superb. I think the women's 1500, maybe less competitive with Kipyegon. The women's 8, I think, how does Keely Hodgkinson win is the only question. But all the other middle distance races, unbelievable. The men's 5. Is Laros doing the 5, Sean?
I think so. Certainly that was, I haven't checked the start list, but that was the intention. It makes it very interesting because Cole Hocker is also doing the 5. So you've got Grant Fisher. Ingebrigtsen spoke to the world's media on Friday and said, essentially, I'm going to go, if I show up on the start line, it will be because I think I can win gold. But I mean, Ingebrigtsen normally is dominate the 5,000 because they don't go quick enough to burn him off, and then he's just quicker over the last 600 meters. And I mean, but if Laros is in the field and Hocker's in the field, it changes the dynamic quite a bit of that race. So
exactly. Yeah, he's had. I mean, that's been candy from babies for Ingebrigtsen for the last 2 or 3 major champs because who's gonna hurt? I mean, and also he can run a 12:40 something when he's in shape, so he could win it 2 ways. But that's going to be really, really fascinating, always towards the back end of the champs. But to answer your question, Mike, all of them, apart from, I think, I don't think the women's 800 is particularly intriguing, and I don't think the women's 15 is either. Because they've just got such a prohibitive favourite in them.
Yeah. Sean, what are you looking forward to in the middle distances?
No, I would agree with all that. I think I would also have Laros as the favourite. I guess there are 2 challenges for him. One is rounds. There are 3 rounds, and we know that the semi-finals will be hard. There are a lot of good runners that are capable of running sort of 3:31 or less. So how will he cope with running? I think it's 3 times in 4 days is the other thing. I guess as well, he has done a lot of racing, and can he keep that going through to mid-September? I think he can. And I think if it comes down to a sprint finish and he's at his best, I can't see anyone beating him. But we haven't seen Josh Kerr since London Diamond League. He is very, very confident. He always is. But Cole Hocker, he showed in Paris that his sprint is something else. So again, it's incredibly intriguing, and it's one of those races that will come down to those split-second decisions. On the day, in the race, maybe even over those last 100 meters. So yeah, I think that will be thrilling. For British eyes, people, Keely Hodgkinson, I think, will be in 153 something shape. It's whether she almost times trials it like Rhodesia in London, or whether she does it a different way. But it's almost impossible to see her being beat. And I agree with Ross about the other stuff. The men's 8 is very interesting. Wanyonyi should be the favourite, but Sejate, I wouldn't rule him out, and there are a couple of others that could also spring a surprise.
Yeah, a couple of American athletes also.
You've also got Arup in there as well in the 800, Marco Arup. Yeah,
exactly.
So he's another one that's...
And Max Bergin, although I can't see him winning necessarily, he always had massive potential, but kept getting injuries. I remember in Eugene in 2022, he had deep vein thrombosis, and so he couldn't run. And he essentially, I think his dad was writing his program, and he, every sort of training session, he just went out super hard and just keep breaking down. But he's had a good season. So he'll be interesting to see for British eyes how he does.
Just on the women, I think among the women, the 5,000 is the best, will be the most interesting, for me anyway, the best event of the World Champs. So you'll have, so remember the first gold of the Champs is likely to be won by Beatrice Chebet. That's on Saturday evening in Tokyo. Then Kipyegon almost certainly wins the 1500 on Tuesday, the 16th. And then they race one another on the 20th over the middle, the point in between 5,000. And I think that's going to be really, really interesting to see because Chebet had the better of Kipyegon in Paris pretty easily, actually, in hindsight. And the finish that she's got is, I've not seen a woman snap with an acceleration the way that Chebet can. But Kipyegon seems better now than she was last year. She seems back to the 2022-23 Kipyegon. So I think that's going to be, for me, the most intriguing, exciting race of the Champs.
I would agree with that. And I guess we saw Chebet run a 1500 a couple of weeks ago, and she ran well, but she didn't run, she ran well behind Sagai. And I wonder whether Kipyegon will look at that and think, well, if I can go with, say, 3 laps to go, and maybe that's when I can sort of break her down rather than leave it to a sprint finish.
Because one thing about Chebet that's quite interesting is I don't think she fancies it early in the races. She's more conservative than Kipyegon. Kipyegon, as much as I dislike the stupid sub-4 thing, she's brave and she'll go 59 if she has to. And Tsegai's actually the same, and that's how she beat Chebet in that 1500. So I would agree exactly, Sean. I think you want to say to Chebet, like, I know you want to wait for the last 200 meters, but I'm not going to allow that. Like, if you're going to beat me, I'm going to force you to do it over 800 meters. So let's go now with a mile to go. I'd even hit her then. Because she doesn't want to go, even when she broke the world record over 5,000 in Eugene, and when she ran what was then the second fastest 3,000, she does it. She does it with a massive negative split, with a huge last lap, and I don't think she wants to go harder earlier. So,
yeah, I mean, again, the fact that you're talking in terms of rivalries here for both of you just makes me excited about watching these things because as you're watching these World Championships, we'll see these rivalries come out. Rossa, just maybe a quick comment, talking about the effect of the various rounds on these things. Obviously, the sprint events have more rounds. The longer distance events, the middle distance events only have like a preliminary round and then a final. How much do you think, or do you think there is a shift in the way that athletes are able to compete when they're doing rounds rather than just going on one-off events? I mean, do you think it has a significant effect on the result and the performances because you have rounds rather than just one-off finals?
I think it does affect them, but I think it's not necessarily because of the physical load that going through rounds imposes on you, unless, like Sean said earlier, your build-up has been slightly compromised and you haven't been able to do the overlaid volume in preparation like Lyles may have. We don't know, maybe. But in general, I think if your training's been good enough to prepare you to run a 327 1500 or a 153 800, whatever it is, you can handle the physical load on the rounds. Where it gets difficult is that every round means extended warm-up. It means travel to the stadium before the warm-up. It means the post-race obligations that you might have, whether that's a doping control even after a round, the mixed zone that you two blokes would have stood in and interviewed people, even after rounds maybe, the cool downs, the travel back to the stadium. And I actually saw an interview with Georgia Hunter-Bell, who was questioned about whether she thought about doing the 1500, 800 double. And she said that one of the things that swayed her towards picking one and not doubling was the fact that the travel to and from the stadium was so time-consuming because you're sitting in Tokyo traffic potentially. It's not exactly right next door. And so I think the mental and time load on the athletes is what actually wears them down, not so much physical, because you can train and prepare to do 3 hard sessions in 4 days, and you can do that half a dozen times over the course of the last 2 months. But you can't really prepare for the fact that this takes you 4 hours to do a 3.5-minute race.
Yeah. Well, yeah, maybe it will turn out some books, but I guess because we don't have the heat issues, it's less likely to be a factor. I always think that when the heat plays a role in these heats, you potentially could have some confounding results in the final, but as we've already discussed, not such an issue in Tokyo.
Yeah.
Switching to the field events, obviously much of the discussion will be around Mondo Duplantis. I think his world record's what, 629 now, and I remember how long it took for him to break Sergei Bubka's record, which was, I think, was 612. But I mean, it's remarkable how literally every single time he competes, he's jumping over to the point where it's almost become boring. But Sean, I mean, is there something? I often wonder, is he just a remarkable athlete with an amazing ability, or is there something that's changed in pole vaulting? In other words, are the poles stiffer, or are the shoes faster, all that sort of thing? Is there anything that's technically assisting Mondo Duplantis to be arguably the greatest track and, well, particularly the greatest field star we've seen in a couple of decades?
Before Sean answers, it's wild though that we talk about Mondo and the pole vault. It's like there's no other blokes doing it.
Yes.
Oh, is it the shoes or the pole? Because no one else has had a chance to use the shoes and the poles. Only him.
Yeah, but is there? I mean, we have seen some. We've seen a six. Somebody did a 6.18. Yeah. So we are seeing heights that we've never seen before, not just from Duplantis. So it's yeah. I mean, I wonder if there's something happening. Ross, I mean, do you have any thoughts on it before I ask
Sean may have more. I just think it's like it's pole vault. It's Mondo. Who else?
He's a guy that can run 100 in what 10.3. You know, he's been training for it since he was 4 or 5 years old, wasn't he? He had a pole vault. His dad was a good pole vaulter, and I think you have like supreme physical ability with someone that's got the muscle memory of having done something for 20 something years. He's extraordinary, and I don't think it's obviously those Puma spikes he wear will help him run a bit quicker and give him a little bit extra string. But I think he could run in off the street shoes and still probably jump 580 or something. It's I don't think I think he's just so much better than everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, it is just incredible to watch. I mean, it is a thing of great beauty. And I always think that's one event where I wish they would have the pole vault kind of where the long jump pit is, so that you could actually see it closer to you if you were sitting in the stand, versus being in the middle of the field where you don't see the true beauty of it. When you watch it on television and you see the pole vaulter, and particularly Duplantis jumping, and the speed that he reaches, and just the pure height that he gets is amazing. And if I was an organizer of a track and field meeting, I'd literally move them to right in front of the stadium, because then I think it'd be remarkable. So
yeah, I was at the World Indoor Champs in Portland in 2016, and they actually staged the pole vault competitions in a sort of, I don't know, I can't remember what it was a smaller gym, but it had like 7,000 people there, and I was sort of, because I had my accreditation, I could be right under it, but everyone was up close, 7,000 people, and it was just the event looked completely different. And I think one thing, going back to earlier discussion, track and field doesn't do well enough is capture speed, is capture. I notice now in skiing events, downhill skiing, like they often have drones that sort of go behind the skiers, and you might get a much better sense of the speed and the rhythms and the movements. And I wish track and field found a way of showing, because he's leaping over 1.5 times roughly a London double-decker bus. It's extraordinary, and yet you don't get that really from the telly.
Yeah, and I remember back in the day when we had a South African by the name of Okut Brits participating in the pole vaults in the mid-90s, and he was, the world leader at one point, and often used to fail at championship level, purely because he would explain to me that it's such a technical sport that if you're a very good pole vaulter, you can't actually jump the lower heights because you don't have the poles to do that. And in other words, it's a particular stiffness of the pole. And as you go up, the ability to be able to use a very stiff pole becomes the challenge. In other words, Duplantis is probably using a pole that nobody else can handle in terms of its stiffness. So technically, it's an incredibly hard sport. And I think that's just what makes it so remarkable, is that in the history of pole vault, even great pole vaulters can sometimes fail. But Duplantis seems like that person who is always consistently able to perform in a sport which doesn't have a record of that. Just looking at the results, I'm looking at the top 5 pole vaults in history, and Armand Duplantis obviously the best at 6.29. Renaud Lavallien was the second fastest, 6.16 was his. Then Sergei Bubka was actually 6.15, not 6.12. And then we just touched on Emmanuel Karalis, the Greek athlete. 6.08 was his height, which he did in early August this year. So he's potentially the silver medalist, but again, it shows you that there is some movement in the pole vault behind Mono Duplantis Ross.
Yeah, look, and eventually, so someone at least they're jumping higher than Duplantis was at the start of his journey. But as you say, the most amazing thing is the technical consistency of it, because it's a room
Yeah,
where the margin for error is probably pretty small. But when
yeah,
Duplantis is bad, he jumps 2 centimeters under the world record. That's what bad day out. So yeah,
yeah.
it is impressive. I just
And
find
then
it, monotonous.
just a couple of other highlights in the field events. So Ross, any other field events that kind of strike you as interesting? I know field is not necessarily something we're all that passionate about, but there are some remarkable things. And I did see the amazing high jump and Zurich, and watching people like Nina Kennedy, Australian. She's the
She,
running, sorry, she's the pole vaulter actually.
yeah, and she's out
But
actually. She pulled out the other day with an
she
injury.
out.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
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 Uh,
So,
w-
yeah, I
w-
mean,
women's high jump is always a pretty good one to watch, and I think it's become
yeah.
more and more competitive. Mahuchik broke the world record, but she hasn't been as good this year. And Ola Slagers from Australia has actually beaten her a couple of times, so I think that'll be a pretty good one to watch. The men's long jump has been really good this year. There have been some pretty good long jump competitions with leads changing in the last jump in the Diamond League circuit, so look forward to that. We'll
Mhm.
do preview and recaps of all the events day by day to give you more detail. Because I'll be honest, and actually this is quite telling. Is I know 50 times more about track events than field events. So somehow to people who actually follow the sport, they're not delivered.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Sean, your thoughts on the field events? Where do you sit in terms of the events that you like to watch?
I mean, we don't have many Brits. We used to have like Greg Rutherford, and we had Philip Sadura in the triple jump back then. So I'm like you guys. I follow the track and the road more. I think the women's high jump ascension. I think the women's long jump will be great. We've got Davis Woodhall, we've got Matambo, we've got who's got Brian from the US. I mean, there's a bunch of athletes that could go over 7 meters. So I think that will be a good event. I'm also we should, I guess it's a bit of track and field, but I think the women's heptathlon is always interesting. I mean, Nafe Tiam, we haven't seen much of her this year, but she's. I always in my head I always think the world's best athlete in any sport is probably the men's decathlon champion and the women's heptathlon champion probably. And Nafi hasn't probably got much longer left, so it'll be a pleasure seeing her. So yeah, they're the two or three that spring to my mind.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then, I mean, final question from me. And we saw, I think it was a couple of months ago now, the launching of this new World Athletics Ultimate Championship event, which is supposedly, well, isn't supposedly, is happening between basically in the events when there's not an Olympic Games or a World Championships. And Sean, I'm interested I mean, you obviously have had conversations with Seb Coe over this. I often wonder, like, why do this and not just have another World Championships? Because it feels like they're trying to create this sort of 3 day mini World Championships because they just want to fill that space between the major events. And I'm a bit confused by it instead of just having another World Championships.
Well, I think you've got to remember that this next year is the year where you will have continental championships. So you have the European Championships, you also have the Commonwealth Games. So throwing in
Mm,
another 9 day event on top of that is
mm,
probably too much. At the same time, when you speak to Co and others, they make the point that it wants something, a world event is something that makes news and headlines. So this is a kind of way they're going to do it. And I know they're flying Usain Bolt out to Tokyo, and he will be their kind of one of their ambassadors to kind of try and give it a bit of a sort of a push, an early push. But yeah, that's the thinking behind it. People don't
mm,
care about Diamond League that much or the Continental Champs anymore. So having an event where the top stars show up for 3 days, hopefully will make news and headlines and keep the sport in the public eye.
mm. And it won't be country representation; it will be individual athletes, as we see in the Diamond League. That's that style of competition.
Yeah, and many events it will just be a straight final, or in some of the
Mm,
sprints, semi-final, then into final. So it's very much sort of wham bam and on we go.
Yeah. Ross, what are your thoughts on another event? Again, just feels like another Diamond League final.
Yeah, I mean, if it's the way to go, it just shows you why I shouldn't be in charge of marketing. Because my perception, especially around sports, is that value comes from scarcity.
Mm.
Which is somewhat paradoxical given that we've spent some part of this conversation talking about how the sport needs to see its rivals more often in matchups with one another and facilitate those stories in a more continuous way and not wait for a McLaughlin Bowl race every 4 years. Let's rather try and have it more often. So maybe I'm contradicting myself. But it was the scarcity that makes it valuable. And when you saturate the market with too many of the same race, then eventually the consumer, the spectator, says, I can watch that again next week. Let me tune out now. And then you lose them maybe forever. That's always been my paradigm. But I have been learning and reading a lot more lately about how, in general, in the entertainment industry, it's become more of a trend. You just got to keep producing content for people. And if you stop, they find someone to replace you with. So, musicians, and I'm referring now to a podcast I heard recently, musicians used to bring an album out every 2 to 3 years. Now they have to bring a single out every week. So what's the equivalent for sport? I guess that's the question. So maybe they know something, these guys, and they realize that if you don't put these superstars on a very prominent stage every single year, then the attention span of the potential fan, not the existing one, but the potential one, is so short that you just never get them.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah.
I just think... what sport? So football's a 4-year World Cup. Amazingly, they haven't gone to more. Cycling, we have a world champs every year. So there are models where you can go world champion every single year, and there's others where you do have to wait for 4-year cycles. Olympic Games being the most obvious one. And I wonder how they titrate the interest in that. That's obviously the dilemma that Coe and his creative team have got around at the moment.
Yeah. I always think you can take elements of, World Championship jerseys, for instance, in cycling always mean a lot when the person wears that throughout the year. Couldn't they do the same at an athletics track and field event where you have the world champion always in a certain kit or something? I don't know. Just spitballing here, I guess, to some extent.
Yeah.
So sorry, Ross.
Sorry, I was just going to say, speaking of dilemmas for athletics, it would be remiss of us to not have this discussion with Sean, because the other big thing in Tokyo, off track, is that every athlete who participates in a women's event will have had a cheek swab or a blood test to verify that they are in fact female, with those who don't pass that screen having subsequent tests. And we've discussed this on the podcast, so we don't need to go into technical details, but Sean has spoken to Coe in the last few weeks about his perceptions about how that's going. There have been articles in some media talking about how it's been really bad. World Boxing, let's be honest, haven't done a great job of it. They've made a few, I think, operational errors in delivery. But Sean, I wanted to just get your impressions of how you thought that that's gone ahead of and will impact Tokyo.
Well, when we spoke to Coe, I guess, about 10 days ago, he said it was over 90% of female athletes had the test already. And he said the remaining few would either be tested before Tokyo or at their holding camps in Tokyo. So he said there were one or two issues. Obviously, French athletes, they couldn't test in France, so that's had to be dealt with. But he said the one thing that struck him was and you won't necessarily got this in the media or even from the athletes themselves, but he said behind the scenes, the reaction to these cheek swab tests, he said, was overwhelmingly positive. So the women were telling him they were for it. Now that's, there have been one or two. I've seen CBC, the Canadian broadcaster, quoted two unnamed athletes, one of whom said they had to, I think, travel 5 hours for the test, and they were saying it was there. And then someone else complained. But according to Coe, at least, the women are for this.
I mean, Ross, just explain what they're actually doing in these tests. What are they testing for, and what are they determining?
Yeah, so I'm pretty resolute in trying to always call it a screen. It's been a struggle, but it's a screen initially, and the difference between a screen
as opposed to a test.
Yeah, and so the difference is, it may sound semantic, but I think it's quite important procedurally, because a test is something that gives you a definitive outcome. A screen is something that is a first filter that divides the population into groups. In this instance, it's a screen that looks for what's called the SRY gene, the sex-determining region on the Y chromosome. And if you have that screen and it involves either a cheek swab, where they take some cells from the inside lining of your cheek, or a blood test can do the same thing, and then you do some tests on it and you look for the presence of this SRY gene, right? If that's there, then it indicates that there is male genetic material, and it indicates the need for further testing, which would then identify specifically why that is there. Have we identified a trans woman, a male who identifies as a woman? Is it a case of a DSD athlete like we know existed here in South Africa with the 800 meters, Caster Semenya? So then based on the subsequent downstream of the screen tests, you can identify the diagnosis and you can make a determination of whether that athlete is allowed to participate or not. And so in effect, there's a two-step process. Anyone who does not have the SRY gene is cleared immediately to compete in women's sport. If you do, subsequent testing. But the end result is that women have assurances that when they compete, there is no athlete against them with male biological advantage.
So why don't they just test for the Y chromosome?
In effect, that's the screen, right? So that's kind of like the screen with a slightly complex subtext or sub-fine print. But the reason they don't just exclude on the basis of the presence of that is, in World Athletics case, they make exceptions for cases of what's called complete androgen insensitivity syndrome. So in other words, if you have this condition, it's one of the DSD groups where you produce testosterone because you have internal testes, but your body is completely blind to it. It cannot use that testosterone. Then they will say that you have no male advantage, and so therefore there is no reason not to allow you to participate in women's sports. So they're carving out exceptions based on known biology. I'm sure they would add some exceptions to that if they ever identified cases. What you don't want is cases where there is clear male performance enhancement or male biology enhancing performance, and so then you exclude on that basis. But a screen is too blunt. The simple presence of the Y chromosome in the screen is too blunt.
Wow. I didn't know that, I have to be honest. I thought that would be a simple test, but it's a bit more complicated than I imagined, yeah.
You could make a case for doing the simple test, by the way, but I think the way the issue has evolved over time, so for instance, in the 1980s, there was a Spanish hurdler who wrote a letter, was published in Lancet, which is a very famous scientific journal. She was among the group of athletes who was being screened at that time and then either told you were sex chromatin positive or not, and depending, that was a slightly different test, effectively looking for the same thing, but it was a blunt tool, and she was told not to run, and became a big controversy. And I think controversies like that, where they didn't manage the issue well, are the reason that they did away with sex screening in the first instance. I would argue that now, with sophistication 30, 40 years on of these laboratory processes, you could probably reintroduce it the way it was then and still deal with it the same way as it was, but better. So the sport has to be operationally perfect on this stuff, because you can't screw it up. But I think they could do it, right? But there's all these sort of legal fail-safes and allowances, exceptions they've had to carve out. Has he spoken to you about any of that sort of stuff, Sean, or is it just kind of like, this is what we're doing, get on with it?
Yeah, no, it's very been top level. We haven't gone into absolute depth.
Anyway, it's I mean, all the sports, World Athletics was one of the first, have made this call to protect the women's category. And if you make that commitment, you have to have a way to identify who it needs protecting from. This is the only way you do it. Either that, or you've got to say, submit challenges. And then it's a free-for-all where everyone says how people look. That's a disaster. So you have to do it this way, in my opinion.
Just a short digression, because I was actually asking myself this question earlier when I was doing some research for this pod. But when they did some sex testing back in the 80s, 90s, something like that. How did they do it then? And was it that blunt instrument that you're talking about?
Yeah, so it was called a sex chromatin passport back then. This is the 80s, 90s. I mean, if you go back to the 60s, it was way worse, right? It was the nude parades, physical examination by a doctor. So we want to steer clear of that, right? The way it used to work then was a cheek swab, and then you examine it under a microscope, and you look for the presence of what's called a bar body. It's a little black blob that you can see under a cell, in a cell under a microscope. And if that was there, it meant that you had two X chromosomes. If that was missing, it meant you must be XY and therefore male. So you're kind of looking for similar things, just via the other direction, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a slight shift, but the technology is roughly the same from
Yeah.
those
Yeah, and
late
in
80s, early 90s.
so that was in the 80s. In the 90s, the it's called a PCR, polymerase chain reaction test for the SRY gene came in. So the test they're doing now, the screen they're doing now, is very much the same as from the 90s. It's just a better test, cheaper, more accessible, faster. And then it's got this downstream process behind it.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
So 2,000 athletes, 200 countries, 49 events. That's what awaits us in the week of the World Championships. For those of you living in Europe, it'll be kind of mid-morning. I think in South Africa, it's kind of mid-morning as well. 10:30 is the evening session. And then if you want to watch the morning sessions on the weekends, that's like, literally the early morning as in when we're sleeping. But it should be an exciting week, and we're going to attempt to bring you as much of the highlights as we can over the course of the week. Hopefully we can get Sean to come and join us some point. I'm looking at you, Sean, just to kind of get us a bit of an insight when you're there and to kind of give us but I know you're very busy doing your job for The Guardian. But from us and Sean and Ross, it's goodbye.